Well, good evening, and it's just really great to be able to share with you tonight. And I have something a little different tonight, and I think you'll enjoy it. But first of all, I'll just praise you. If you don't remember that song, it's we'll work till Jesus comes. And I guess we would say tonight the message that we can learn is from the book, excuse me just a minute. Maybe Craig, you could get me a little water. But it's about Nehemiah in the Bible. And he had a job on his hand, and it was a big job, but the people had to join him and had to work. So we're going to just see how this plays out in our lives. Well, the Babylonian crisis was pretty well over, but the people could go home, but home to what? The Babylonians had so destroyed them that it was almost unbelievable. They couldn't go back to the city itself, and so they had to just sort of stay on the outskirts of the city because there were no walls, and walls were important to the city, very important in those days. We don't think of trying to build a wall around our house, but they were important because there were enemies everywhere. And it had the hero of our story today, Nehemiah, was in Persia. And he had a very prestigious job. He served the king there, and his job was to be a king bearer. Now, the job of a king bearer, besides being lucrative, it also meant that he would keep the king happy. And he was always responsible to see that his cup was full and that he had everything, and he should himself keep a smile on his face and be jovial and happy and everything. Well, he was okay, but his people weren't okay. You know, it certainly comes to me because I get a lot of mail about the persecution that's going on in the world. And though I am not afraid at night, they are. And they never know when some of their family will be carried off and killed. And that is true, and especially if they're Christians. Well, he couldn't, one day there was two men that came from Jerusalem, where all the havoc was, all the rubble and everything. And he said, "So how are things back home?" And they said, "Oh, you wouldn't believe it, Nehemiah." He said, "All the gates that surrounded the city have all been burned. We have no gates." And he said, "All the walls are down." And as he listened, he all of a sudden lost all of what he was supposed to be, the man that he was supposed to be for the king. It just left him. And his face was sad, and he couldn't help himself. And so the king would come in, and pretty soon he sensed a difference. And he said, "Nehemiah," he said, "I sense your face." And he was a little bit afraid. But he said, "You know what I sense? This is sorrow of heart. What has made you unhappy?" Well, then he told him, "All my brothers and my sisters are in trouble back at Jerusalem, which is my home." Well, he said, "You know, I'm sorry too." You see how God is at work? He had already had a letter from the king of the country, which is Cyrus, that said, let those people build back there in Jerusalem. Let them do whatever they have to do in their land. And so they had that, but here now is the king of Persia, and he's saying, I'll give you supplies, and you can take that, and I'll send an entourage with you, so that they can handle the surprise, and you won't have that to worry you. He was so thankful, and so here they went. When he got to Jerusalem, he already sensed that there were enemies inside of the city. And some of those leaders, some of the Jewish people had married into their Sanballat and Tobiah, that were their names and everything. So it's just bad news. And they had, the Christians that were there had been very compromising. And so he thought, I've got to go out and look this situation over and survey it and see how bad it is. But I'm not going to tell the people what I'm doing, and I'm certainly not going to let these enemies know what I'm doing. So he goes out there at night, and he walks around where there should be walls, and nothing was left. Nothing, just rubble on the ground. Well, that was why he was there. So he said, I prayed to my God. I prayed and asked God to make the people willing to help, to get those walls built back up, and to take care of the enemy was going to fight him every step of the way. So with God on his side, he began to reach out into the surrounding communities where the Jews had settled. They couldn't settle in Jerusalem because they had plundered, the Babylonians had plundered the city. And so he gathered them up. He gathered a lot of the would have been nobles, and he began to break the news. And so it was about 6 months, I believe, before he could ever get the thing going. It was a big deal. So finally he said, you know what we're going to do? We're going to put you to work. And they said, and the Bible said they had a mind to work. Isn't that wonderful that you can belong to an organization like the church and they have a mind to work? I have a church like that. They're great workers. Greg that helps us every Tuesday night, he's one of the best workers they've got. He'll spend all day and come home late at night tired just because he can do so many things that maybe other people can't do. But then here he is tonight. Well, when he revealed the plan to him, he said, we're going to do this by families. And the families, now what do you mean? He said, I'm going to give every family that's represented here by a father, and he said a mother and children, and he said, I'm going to give you a section of the wall to build. Well, now that was a great plan. God was giving him the plan. And he said, we'll have men to give you the tools, and you'll work with the weapon in one hand. And he said, and you'll do the spreading around in another hand, but you'll have the weapon in one hand. Boy, that's a good word, because our weapons are not carnal, but they're mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. And so here they were. And so he said, you'll go there, you'll go there, you'll go there, you'll go there. And the people, they took to it, they understood it, they studied it, and the Bible said they had a mind to work. And they seemed to just all be in pretty much harmony. But what about these enemies out here? And the head of it was what they called Sanballat and Tobiah. And they're not names that you necessarily would want to name your children. But they tried scorn. What are these just feeble Jews going to do? Do they think they're going to build that wall in a day? So they tried scorn. And then they tried compromise. And they said, well, why don't you come down, Nehemiah, and we'll talk this over? And Nehemiah answered them and said, I have neither lot nor plans to talk over with you. This is a matter between us and our God. Well, they began to threaten him. They tried everything they could, and I thought, if that isn't like the enemy, that he tries every level, and he studies us to just see where our vulnerable areas are. So they said, do you have letters for this? They said, we do. He said, we were given letters from Cyrus. Well, I guess that's not going to work. So every day they kept working on the wall, working on the wall, working on. And some were working on the gates. They kept guards. They had guards at night. They had guards during the day, watching for the enemy and trying to finish the wall. And one day they said the walls were built. And I think about our own lives. You know, we're on a journey. And sometimes we're threatened with the walls. Do you remember, did you have a father in your home that used to go around every door in your house to check and see if the locks were on? Is it going to be safe for my family tonight? I remember my dad doing that. He'd go around and say, is that door locked? Is the back door locked? Is this door locked? He would check them all out. And you know, we felt safe. And I think that now the people are feeling safe within the wall. But you have to stay behind the wall. And of course, this was going to take some time. It was going to take a lot of prayer, and it did. And how they you know, he started reading the Bible to them, and you know, they stood for hour after hour after hour and listened to the Bible. They hadn't heard the Bible for years. So they built the wall. And you know what? Little by little, bit by bit, every day, every hour, every minute, we're building the walls of our life to keep the devil out and to nourish the God that is within. And you know, it takes both. Yeah, don't ever take anything for granted. Don't ever think, well, that doesn't apply to me. Well, then you're the first one to be vulnerable. Yes. Guard your walls. Guard your gates. Check them at night. Check them at morning. Check them in the afternoon. Check them at night. Yes. Don't be outside the walls. You know, outside the walls, there are temptations. Outside the walls, there's pornography. Outside the walls, there's things on the internet we have no business with. And then there's movies. Could you sit in a movie where they continually took God's name in vain? You see, we don't think of those things, but they are our walls, and we are responsible for our walls. Now, why? Because of what we have within. Now, the Bible said, be steadfast, immovable. And when we do, we will build these walls, and someday God will say, the walls are done. Come on home. Now, the song that I'm playing, now I'll give you the name of it, will work till Jesus comes. we'll work till Jesus comes. We'll work till Jesus comes.